Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where today I'm coming to you from Aoyama Park. I don't make a lot of videos from here so much anymore, but today I'm here because Hinokicho Park, it's quite windy over there and the pond is frozen over, and that cold wind blowing off of the frozen pond is kind of a little chilly this morning. So I didn't want to get any more cold than I have to. Over here at Aoyama Park, I'm, I guess, surrounded on three sides by things which kind of cut down the wind. Right in front of me, toward that way, is the Tokyo National Art Center. Over toward this way is the, I guess, Institute for Foreign Policy Studies building. And over toward this way I have these really big oak trees, which are still full of leaves right now, so they're kind of protecting me from the cold wind, and also less wind noise here. Anyway, today's video is going to be about another Petri rangefinder camera, the third one I've done in the last month. There seems to be a lot of interest in these Petri cameras, so I thought I'd make a video about yet another one. For those of you who are new to my channel, I sell vintage Japanese cameras in my online store, japanvintagecamera.com. I have an Etsy store, which is also called Japan Vintage Camera, so if you'd like to buy this Petri here, which still has the original lens cap, by the way, please visit one of my stores. I'll post links to my stores in the description below the video. So the Petri camera company produced a wide variety of cameras from the 1950s until the 1970s. Some of these cameras were kind of like inexpensive stuff, the kind of things you would buy in comic books in America in the 60s and 70s. Others were main market cameras produced for just people who wanted a decent camera, and there were a few really high quality cameras produced. So Petri pretty much had a camera for every market, but probably had a better market for the low-end, I guess, purchasers than other makes. But this camera, this particular one, as I said, was made in the 1950s, late 50s, and this was the best of the rangefinder cameras which Petri made at that time. It had a really cool design. It wasn't quite the spacey design which came on the Petri 7 or Petri Professional f1.7, and this was actually a better made camera than those ones. But still, not a bad looking camera. Kind of, we have a few sharp angles and things like that, which got a little bit extreme in the later years, but for the most part, it's just simple, no-nonsense camera with everything set up and I guess where it should be. I really like this particular camera. This camera was made to go head-to-head against a few of the other quality rangefinder cameras at the time, mainly cameras like the Konica 3A and the Olympus 35S. And this has the same focal length lens as the better version, or I guess the high-end version of the 3A, a 50mm f1.8 lens, whereas the Olympus came with a f1.9 lens, a little bit slower. In regards to quality, I would say that the Petri, this particular one, is better than the Olympus 35S of that era. Olympus in the late 50s was just starting to become a major camera company, and that's when they were making their first big strides to becoming a really top-notch manufacturer of cameras. But in the early 50s, mid-50s, they were kind of simple and inexpensive and not very well made cameras. They were reliable enough, but the fit and finish wasn't very good. The quality of materials wasn't good. The lenses were quite good, but that's pretty much all you could say for those, and at least on those particular cameras. On their TLR cameras and I guess folding medium format cameras, the lenses were not such a good quality, good optically, but the quality of the glass deteriorated over time. This isn't a problem in the rangefinder cameras, and certainly not a problem with these Petri cameras. The quality of the glass in here is quite good, and I would say as good as the Konica 3A. But the design is a little bit different, and I prefer, everyone would prefer, I guess, the viewfinder system on the Konica 3A. That was its strong point. The Olympus 35S featured parallax correction. Of the three cameras, the Petri has, I guess, the least wonderful viewfinder rangefinder system, but the rest of the camera, I think, makes up for what it lacks in that. You'll notice that this is really green on this side. Petri used this green colored glass for a couple of reasons. It added color to the frame lines, so they would stand out better in the viewfinder, and it added color to the split image in the rangefinder, which makes it easier to use in certain situations. A lot of people with old rangefinder cameras, they used to put yellow or red film over the rangefinder window to increase the contrast of the rangefinder system. Petri simply used this green glass, and it works quite well. In a lot of situations it's not necessary, but sometimes it's a little bit tricky. If you're shooting in situations where, you know, like say winter trees, and you know, tree branches kind of look very similar, kind of hard to spot through a rangefinder system. If some of them are green and some of them are gray, you're going to be able to, I guess, line them up more easily. So a pretty good plus, and something which wasn't really necessary on cameras like the Konica 3A, but which would have helped cameras like the 35S. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue talking about this camera, and I'm going to go ahead and describe the features, functions, and controls starting at the top. The top here, it looks very similar in some ways to the, say, Nikon S series of rangefinder cameras, with, you know, with the overall shape and location of the dials and such, and not a bad design. I like how everything is right here. All the useful information is right on the top, and a nice flat design. Over on the left side here, we have the rewind knob. This pulls up to make it easier to put in and remove the film canisters, push it back down any other time. Next to that, we have a shoe for mounting a flash gun. There's a PC sync socket located here on the front of the lens, so if you're using a flash, just slide it on here and plug it in the side. You can use the flash sync speed, which I think is like 1/30th of a second on this camera if you're using a bulb flash. If you're using a modern strobe flash, and you can easily use one of those with this camera, just follow the instructions on the flash. Moving over to this here, we have this kind of odd looking dial thing, and there are two things located in this dial. On the front we have the film counter, where this little red arrow is pointing to, and this is of course how you count how many exposures you've taken. And on the back here we have a reminder dial to remind you what kind of film you have loaded in the camera. We have two colors here. We have black and red. Red is meant, red and other colors here, meant to indicate you're using color film. Back in those days, black and white film was probably more popular because it was less expensive, and you could develop it in your kitchen. Color film was a little bit more expensive and involved, so yeah, not quite as popular. So yeah, if you're shooting color, set it to the color side and just turn the red arrow until it matches the speed of what you have loaded in the camera. If you're shooting black and white, just turn it around that way so the black arrow is pointing to the film speed. This makes no difference in the operation of the camera. It's just a reminder. You can set it to whatever you like or not set it at all. It's not going to make any difference in how the camera operates. If you're using one of these cameras which doesn't have a built-in meter, you're probably going to be using a handheld light meter or a smartphone light meter app, and with that you will input the film speed into the app or into the handheld light meter. This here is pretty much irrelevant. Next to that we have the shutter release button. This one doesn't have a standard cable release, but it is threaded around the outside of the base here, so you can use the optional shutter release adapters. These were common on twin lens reflex cameras, the old Nikon rangefinder and early F model cameras. They're all pretty much the same. They just kind of screw on here, and then you can attach a standard cable release to the top. You can find them on eBay, and old camera shops sometimes have a few of them sitting around, these places which have old cameras. Over here we have the film winding and shutter charging lever. Very similar to what I see on the Nikon cameras, kind of the same design. On the back of the camera we have pretty much nothing other than the viewfinder eyepiece, but this is a nice large one and was kind of designed to make it a little bit easier for people who wear glasses to use the camera. In those days I think most people in Japan wore glasses. Today most people wear contacts, but a lot larger than what you find in earlier, say, Nikon cameras or contacts or whatever, around a little bit made before this camera was made. Moving to the bottom of the camera, we have just a tripod socket, a standard 1/4 inch size, and a release button to release the winding mechanism so you can rewind the film. On the front I already mentioned this glass here for the projected frame lines and the split image, and here's the viewfinder window. A little bit small, but bigger than a lot of other cameras, maybe about the same size as the Olympus 35S or some of the Minolta rangefinder cameras at the time. Plenty big enough to use easily. Behind that, on the very bottom of the lens here, we have this chrome ring with the numbers printed on it. This is the depth of field scale, showing how much depth of field you have at any given aperture. In front of that we have the focusing tab here, and we have the focusing, I guess, distance guide here, or focusing scale, which is arranged in feet on this camera. I mentioned in my video about the Petri F2 that the cameras were designed mainly for servicemen. And of course, the f1.8 was quite popular with servicemen, but not as popular as the f2 or f2.8, because this was a significantly more expensive camera. And service members in those days didn't earn a lot of money. And even in my days, they didn't earn a lot of money. The only camera I could afford when I was in the Army was a used OM10. Anyway, moving to the front of that, we have the aperture selector ring, and as I said, we have a maximum aperture of f1.8, and that's kind of written in a big number here. It's kind of a say, wow, this is an f1.8 lens. It was pretty much one of the fastest you could get in the fixed lens rangefinder camera of that time. In front of that, we have the shutter speed selecting ring, and we have a full range of shutter speeds here, all the way up to 1/500th of a second. We have a self-timer located over on the other side here, and as I've mentioned in other videos, please avoid using the self-timers if you can, because they are kind of fragile, the most fragile part of an old vintage camera. They are meant to be very precise, but to make them precise, they have to use hardened steel parts, and these hardened steel parts and washers put in a very small place of a self-timer, which fits inside here. The hardened steel tends to get corroded or rusted, and the washers tend to stick. And so if the camera's been exposed to like a humid environment or something like that, the rusty parts can stick and the self-timer won't work. Sometimes when it's stuck, if you run some lighter fluid along the little lever here, just holding it so it's pointing straight up so gravity pulls the lighter fluid down into the self-timer mechanism, sometimes it'll free up and start working again. But it's better to be safe and not sorry, and try to avoid using it if you can. And some of these old cameras, I find that they've actually taped over it to make sure that people haven't, they don't accidentally, I guess, engage it when they're trying to take a photograph. Loading the film in the camera is quite simple. You open the film back by pulling down on this little tab here on the bottom of the left side of the camera, and the door pops open like so. Very simple layout, pretty much like any other 35mm camera. To load the film, I simply push up on the fork here so the knob pops up. I drop my film canister inside and then push this down to hold the film canister in place so it doesn't pop out while I'm trying to load the film. And I'll go ahead and feed the film across and stick it into the take-up spool here, and just turn it with my fingers a little bit until the film is pulled across and the holes in the film are being taken up by these teeth on the take-up sprocket. And then close the door and just fire the shutter. I accidentally pushed the button here on the bottom. Go ahead and wind and fire the shutter until the number 1 lines up with the red dot here, and the camera is ready to go. Anyway, that's it for my video about the Petri 35 f1.8 rangefinder camera. This one is going on my bench later this week, and I'll go ahead and get it ready, and hopefully I should have it available for sale next week. I plan to be doing more videos in the near future. If you'd like to see these, please subscribe. If you like the video, please like it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.